The silence of the Blackwood Reserve isn't a natural silence. It doesn't hum with the vibration of insects or the distant rustle of nocturnal predators. It is heavy, like wet wool pressed against your face. I'm an experienced camper. I've done the PCT, I've spent weeks in the deepest thickets of the Ozarks, and I've never felt unwelcome. But 3 days into the Coffin Ridge Trail, the forest stopped feeling like a landscape and started feeling like a spectator. The pines seemed to lean inward, their needles knitting together to blot out the sky, and the air carried a stagnant, iron-rich scent that reminded me of a butcher shop. It started with the fire on the first night. It was about 9 p.m., and the shadows were stretching into long, distorted fingers. I was boiling water for a pouch of dehydrated beef stew when I heard it. A sharp, wet snap of a branch, maybe 20 feet behind my tent. I froze. In the woods, you don't look for the sound, you listen for the rhythm. Heavy, rhythmic snapping usually means a bear or a stray elk. But this was irregular. It sounded like someone trying to walk on stilts for the first time. Heavy thuds followed by a dragging sound that set my teeth on edge. "Hello?" I called out. My voice felt small, swallowed instantly by the pines. From the darkness, a voice answered. "Hello?" My blood turned to slush. It wasn't just my word. It was my exact inflection. The same slight rasp from the dry air, the same rising pitch of uncertainty. It sounded like a recording played back through a broken speaker, mechanical and hollow. "Who's there?" I grabbed my bear spray, my knuckles white. There was a long pause. Then, the sound of something heavy dragging through the dry needles, circling just beyond the reach of my firelight. "Who's there?" the voice whispered. It sounded more distorted now, the S dragging out into a wet hiss that morphed into a low, guttural clicking. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my tent, my headlamp cutting a frantic arc across the nylon walls. Every time I drifted off, I heard the clack, clack, clack of hard bone hitting the ground. Something was skipping around the perimeter of my camp, its gait uneven, its presence immense. By the second day, the woods had gone completely dead. No birds, no squirrels, just the oppressive smell of copper and wet fur. I should have hiked back to the trailhead, but the trail markers were different. I knew I had hiked north, keeping the ridge to my left. But when I tried to backtrack, the white blazes on the trees had been moved. I could see the fresh gouges in the bark where the old paint had been scraped away and new. Frantic slashes of white had been applied. They now faced inward, leading deeper into the ravine, away from the road and toward the dark heart of the reserve. I set up camp in a clearing near a dried-up creek bed, too exhausted to push further. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the deer finally showed itself. I was zipping the rainfly when I saw it standing at the edge of the tree line. At first, I thought it was a massive buck. It was easily 7 feet tall at the shoulder, its silhouette framed against the bruised purple of the twilight. But as my eyes adjusted, the proportions began to scream at my brain that something was fundamentally wrong. The legs were far too long, with joints that bent at impossible, jagged angles, as if the bones had been broken and reset by someone who didn't understand anatomy. The hooves weren't hooves at all. They looked like fused human fingers, blackened and blunt, leaving deep, 5-pronged gouges in the dirt. The neck was elongated, pulsing with a rhythmic muscular thrum that I could feel in my own chest. The face is what broke me. It had the snout of a deer, but the skin was stretched so tight over the bone that it was translucent, showing the pulsing blue veins beneath. It had no hair, only a greasy grayish hide. And the eyes, they weren't on the sides of the head like a prey animal. They were forward-facing, human-shaped, pale, milky orbs that reflected no light, staring with a predatory, intelligent intensity. It stood perfectly still, watching me. Then it opened its mouth. Its jaw unhinged further than any biological hinge should allow, dropping down to its chest, revealing rows of flat, grinding molars interspersed with jagged, needle-like incisors. "Elias," it croaked. My name. It shouldn't know my name. I hadn't said it once since I entered these woods. I hadn't even written it down. "Elias, it's cold. Out here," it said. The voice was a patchwork quilt of sounds, a woman's sob, a man's grunt, and the underlying wet tearing of meat. It began to walk toward me, not with the grace of a deer, but with a jerky, telescopic motion, its limbs extending and contracting like a folding ruler. I scrambled into the tent, fumbling with the zipper, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I spent the next several hours in a state of primal terror. I am writing this now by the light of a dying lantern. It is 3:14 a.m. It is standing directly over my tent. The weight of it is bowing the carbon fiber poles, the fabric groaning under the pressure of its massive body. I can see the silhouette of its hooves pressing into the fabric above my head, the skin-covered bones straining against the nylon. It's heavy. I can hear the labored, rattling breath vibrating through the tent material, a sound like a bellows filled with fluid. It hasn't moved for an hour. It just stands there, its weight shifting occasionally with a sickening squelch. "Elias," it whispers, its face pressed against the thin nylon just inches from my own. I can see the heat of its breath fogging the fabric. "I found your skin. It fits so tight." I can see a long, thin shadow, a finger, a tongue, sliding down the side of the tent, tracing the zipper. It knows how zippers work. It's been playing with the one on my backpack all night. Zip, zip, zip. The sound is rhythmic, hypnotic, and utterly soul-crushing. I have a hunting knife in my left hand and a flare gun in my right. But I know it won't matter. When I look at the shadow of its head against the moonlight, the antlers aren't bone. They're reaching, calcified human arms. Fingers splayed toward the sky, the wrists fused to the creature's skull. The zipper is moving, slow, deliberate. The metal teeth are clicking apart, one by one. If you find this bag, do not look for me. Do not follow the white blazes. The forest isn't empty. It's just hungry for a new voice. I can see its eyes through the opening now. They aren't milky anymore. They're changing. They're starting to look like mine. The search party arrived 4 days later, led by Sergeant Miller of the State Forest Police. They had found the abandoned Subaru at the trailhead, its windows intact, but the interior coated in a fine layer of pollen, as if it had been sitting for years instead of days. "Spread out," Miller commanded, his voice tight. "Stay in radio contact. If you see the subject, do not approach alone. He might be disoriented." The team pushed into the Coffin Ridge Trail, but the atmosphere quickly soured. The veteran trackers among them were the first to notice the anomalies. "Sarge," Deputy Halloway called out, pointing to a pine tree. "Look at the blazes." Miller walked over, his brow furrowed. The white trail markers were fresh, but they were wrong. They weren't painted. They looked like they had been rubbed onto the trees using some kind of chalky, organic substance. And they were positioned low, only 3 feet off the ground, pointing toward a steep, lightless ravine that didn't appear on any of their topographical maps. As they descended into the ravine, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. The smell hit them next. The cloying, sweet stench of rot mixed with something metallic. They found the campsite in a small clearing where the sun never seemed to reach. The tent was still standing, though it was grotesquely deformed. The carbon fiber poles were snapped, but not outward. They were crushed inward, as if a massive weight had sat atop the structure for days. The nylon was shredded, but the tiers were precise, following the seams with surgical accuracy. "Where's the kid?" Halloway whispered, his hand hovering over his sidearm. Miller didn't answer. He was looking at the ground. Around the tent, the dirt had been beaten into a hard, flat, circular path. There were thousands of prints, but they didn't match anything in the forestry manual. They looked like human hands that had been stretched, the fingers fused into singular heavy points. Inside the tent, they found the journal, the ink smeared by what looked like oily sweat. They found the hunting knife, its blade snapped in half, and the flare gun, which had been fired directly into the ground, scorching a black hole into the earth. But they didn't find Elias, at least not at first. "Sarge, over here," a volunteer shouted from the edge of the creek bed. The team gathered at the bank. Hanging from the low branches of a willow tree were decorations. Small bundles of pine needles and dried grass, tied together with what looked like high-tensile fishing line. But upon closer inspection, it wasn't fishing line. It was long, blonde hair, the exact shade of the missing hikers. And then they heard the sound. "Sarge?" The voice came from the thicket across the creek. It was Miller's voice, exact, authoritative, but with a strange, whistling lilt at the end of the word. "Who said that?" Miller barked, his heart racing. "Halloway, was that you?" "No, Sarge," Halloway replied, his face pale. "It came from the brush." The brush parted. A deer stepped out. It was a buck, small and sickly-looking, its fur patchy and gray. It stood on the opposite bank, its head tilted at a 90-degree angle. It looked at the search party with wide, terrified eyes. Eyes that were a vibrant, piercing blue. Elias's eyes. The deer opened its mouth, but no bleat came out. Instead, it spoke in a perfect imitation of the volunteer who had found the hair. "I found your skin," the deer croaked. Then, from the shadows behind the small buck, a much larger shape began to rise. It was the thing from the journal, a towering skeletal horror with arms for antlers and skin that looked like a discarded raincoat. It placed a hand on the small buck's shoulder, a gesture that was almost tender if it wasn't so predatory. The creature looked at Miller. Its jaw dropped, unhinging until it hit the mossy ground. "Miller," it whispered, using the sergeant's own voice. You're late for the hike. The search party didn't wait. They turned and ran, scrambling up the ravine as the sounds of laughter, dozens of different voices, all overlapping, all screaming, all laughing, echoed through the trees behind them. When they reached the trailhead, Holloway looked back. Standing at the edge of the woods, just where the shadows met the light of the parking lot, was a figure. It looked like a man in a ranger's uniform, standing perfectly still. But as the sun hit it, Holloway saw the truth. The uniform was empty, held up by a frame of jagged bone, and the face beneath the wide-brimmed hat was nothing but a snout, stretched thin and white, with milky eyes that promised they would never stop watching. The Blackwood Reserve was closed the next day for environmental maintenance. It hasn't reopened since. Sometimes, if you park near the gate at night, you can hear your mother calling your name from the tree line, her voice perfect, her tone urgent, begging you to come into the cool, quiet dark.